Robert Miller was a husband, a father, and a man who thought he had everything, until he threw away 33 years of marriage for a woman he had never met. But when he arrived in California to finally see Angela, he discovered the truth. Angela didn't exist. Standing in her place was Anthony, a predator with secrets darker than anyone could imagine. Robert Miller had spent most of his life in the same quiet town, in the same house, with the same woman. To everyone who knew him, he was a man of routine. He rose at dawn, mowed the lawn every Saturday, and never missed Sunday service with his wife, Margaret. For 33 years their marriage appeared steady, even admirable. Neighbors often called them the perfect couple, the kind of pair who seemed destined to grow old together. Yet behind the facade of contentment, Robert felt something gnawing at him. It was not that Margaret mistreated him or that he lacked stability. What he longed for was excitement, something unpredictable that could make his heart race again. It began innocently. Robert discovered online chatrooms one night when he could not sleep. Margaret had already gone to bed, and he sat in the glow of the computer screen, scrolling through pages of strangers looking for connection. At first, it was curiosity, the thrill of talking to people he would never meet. But soon the conversations became more personal, more dangerous. He shared small frustrations about his life, frustrations he never voiced to his wife. In return, anonymous users listened, and some even sympathized. That was enough to keep him coming back, night after night. Then he met someone who would change everything. She called herself Angela. She claimed she was in her 40s, living in California, and working in real estate. Her photos showed a woman with dark hair, flawless skin, and a confidence Robert found irresistible. Unlike Margaret, who had grown used to the silence of their home, Angela filled the screen with energy. She asked about his day, remembered little details about his life, and flattered him in ways he had not experienced in decades. Robert was captivated. He told himself it was just a harmless distraction, but his late nights grew longer, his mornings wearier, and his patience with Margaret shorter. Before long, Robert found himself waiting for Angela's messages. If she didn't respond quickly, he grew anxious. When she did, he felt alive in a way he hadn't since he was a young man. Angela told him she admired his dedication as a husband and father, but also hinted that he deserved more than what he had settled for. Robert began to believe her. He started confiding things he had never dared say aloud, how unappreciated he felt, how invisible he sometimes seemed in his own home. Angela listened and told him he was special. She said she could see the man behind the mask, someone full of passion and dreams. Margaret noticed the change but couldn't name it. Robert became distant, distracted during dinner, and often too busy to join her for evening television. When she asked, he insisted he was working late or reading the news. But Margaret felt the space between them widening. Robert didn't care. He was consumed with the fantasy of Angela. He started imagining a new life, a new beginning with her in California. She hinted at meeting someday, and those hints became promises. Slowly, Robert's loyalty to his wife of 33 years faded into the background, replaced by a dangerous obsession that would soon drive him to abandon everything he had ever known. Margaret never saw it coming. For 33 years, she had built her life around Robert, trusting that their marriage was solid enough to survive anything. They had raised children together, endured financial struggles, and cared for aging parents side by side. That kind of history creates a sense of permanence, a belief that no matter what, the bond will hold. But one evening, Robert shattered that illusion. Without warning, he told her he wanted out. He didn't soften the words, didn't offer explanations that made sense, and didn't even pretend he was willing to work things out. Margaret stood there, stunned, trying to make sense of the man she thought she knew. The same man who once vowed forever was now packing a suitcase with trembling hands, barely glancing at her as he stuffed shirts and trousers into a bag. For Robert, the decision felt urgent. Angela had planted the idea of starting fresh, of leaving behind the life that made him feel invisible. She painted pictures of sunny days in California, of shared meals and laughter, of passion he thought he had lost forever. He convinced himself that it wasn't betrayal, but destiny. He told himself that Margaret would be fine, that she would adjust, that after all these years she didn't really need him. He clung to those thoughts as armor against guilt. Margaret begged him to reconsider, her voice trembling with fear. But Robert was already gone in spirit. Within days, the house felt hollow. His closet was half empty, his favorite chair untouched, his toothbrush gone from the bathroom sink. Margaret wandered the quiet rooms in disbelief, replaying every memory, trying to trace where it had all gone wrong. Their children were furious, calling their father selfish, but Robert ignored their messages. His eyes were fixed on California, on Angela, on the promise of something new. When the day of his flight arrived, Robert moved with the determination of a man chasing a dream. At the airport, he avoided calls from his family, silenced his phone, and convinced himself that he was doing the right thing. He boarded the plane with his heart racing, imagining Angela waiting at the other end. In his mind, he pictured the moment they would finally meet, how her smile would light up when she saw him, how all the sacrifice would suddenly make sense. The flight felt endless. He stared out the window as the landscape below shifted, each mile pulling him farther from the life he had built and closer to the unknown. By the time he landed, exhaustion mixed with exhilaration. He rented a car, gripping the wheel tightly as he followed the directions Angela had given him. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across unfamiliar streets. His pulse quickened when he turned into a quiet neighborhood, his eyes searching for the house number she had sent. But as he pulled up to the address, excitement gave way to unease. The house didn't match the pictures Angela had once shared of her glamorous California lifestyle. Instead of a modern home with flowers by the door, he found a weathered building with peeling paint and overgrown grass. The curtains were drawn tight, the kind of secrecy that whispered of things hidden. Robert tried to shake the feeling. He told himself appearances didn't matter, that love was what counted. Still, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him as he cut the engine and stepped out of the car, his suitcase heavy in his hand and his future uncertain. The front door opened slowly, and the moment Robert had been anticipating for months crumbled into confusion. Standing in the doorway was not the beautiful woman from the photographs, but a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly older than Angela claimed to be. His face was weathered, his hair streaked with gray, and his expression calm, almost casual, as though he had been expecting Robert to look surprised. For a few seconds, Robert couldn't move. His mind raced, struggling to reconcile the reality in front of him with the fantasy he had been living. The man introduced himself as Anthony. His voice carried no trace of apology, no hint of embarrassment. He explained, with unsettling confidence, that he was the person Robert had been speaking to all along. The photographs were stolen from a stranger's social media page. The stories about real estate and glamorous nights in California were nothing more than lies, carefully designed to keep Robert interested. Robert's chest tightened, his stomach twisting with humiliation. Months of late-night conversations, confessions, and promises, all of it had been a fabrication, but the lies went deeper. Anthony admitted he had been manipulating Robert from the very beginning, and the relationship had never been about affection. It was about money. Each time Robert thought he was helping Angela with a medical bill or business expense, he had been lining Anthony's pockets. Thousands of dollars had already disappeared from Robert's retirement savings. Robert's world began to spin as the full weight of betrayal set in. He realized he had risked everything, his marriage, his children's respect, his financial security, for someone who didn't even exist. Anthony's demeanor shifted when Robert tried to leave. He stepped closer, blocking the doorway, his tone growing darker. He demanded more money, insisting that Robert had promised to take care of him. The charm of Angela was gone, replaced by a predator who seemed to enjoy watching his victim squirm. Robert felt trapped. The air inside the small house was heavy, the curtains blocking out the fading daylight, the silence broken only by Anthony's voice as he listed his demands. In the cluttered room, Robert's eyes darted around and landed on something unsettling. Piles of letters, photographs, and personal belongings were stacked on a table in the corner. None of them belonged to him. It became clear that he wasn't Anthony's first victim. Dozens of people had been lured into the same trap, seduced by Angela's charm, convinced to send money, and in some cases, convinced to visit in person. Robert's skin crawled as he noticed a woman's purse resting on the floor near the couch, a purse far too new to belong in a house filled with junk. He wondered if its owner had ever made it home. Fear began to replace anger. He had thought he was meeting the love of his life, but instead he was standing in the home of a dangerous man who thrived on lies. Robert knew then that his nightmare was only beginning. He wasn't just dealing with a catfish. He was dealing with a predator who had no intention of letting him walk away easily. Anthony's house felt more like a trap than a home. Once Robert stepped inside, the door closed firmly behind him, the sound echoing like a lock on a prison cell. Anthony moved with a calmness that was unsettling, as if he had rehearsed this moment many times before. The small living room was suffocating, crammed with piles of old newspapers, boxes stacked to the ceiling, and random objects scattered across the floor. The blinds were drawn, keeping the house in permanent twilight, and the stale air smelled faintly of cigarettes and dust. Robert's suitcase still dangled from his hand, but he no longer felt like a guest. He felt like a hostage. Anthony wasted no time making his intentions clear. He demanded money. Robert tried to protest, saying he had already sent enough, but Anthony's face hardened. His calm voice turned threatening. He spoke of the personal secrets Robert had shared during their months of conversations. Confessions about his unhappy marriage, his financial accounts, even his health. Those secrets were now weapons. Anthony warned that if Robert refused, he would expose everything to his family, his friends, and his former colleagues. Shame flooded Robert's body. He realized this man had planned every step with precision, drawing him in with affection and then trapping him with blackmail. As Robert sat stiffly on a worn sofa, he noticed the signs of other lives scattered around the room. A stack of opened envelopes revealed letters addressed to names he didn't recognize. On a shelf sat framed photos of people who were clearly not Anthony's family, smiling faces cut from another world. Near the hallway, a half-open box contained cell phones, dozens of them, each scratched and worn. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had run this scheme countless times, luring strangers into his web and stripping them of money and dignity. Robert's blood ran cold when his eyes returned to the purse on the floor, untouched and out of place. He wondered if it was just another stolen item, or a clue to something far more sinister. Anthony grew impatient. He ordered Robert to call his bank to transfer more money immediately. Fear squeezed Robert's chest as he fumbled for his phone. His hands trembled, but he obeyed, terrified of what Anthony might do if he resisted. As he spoke to the bank's representative, he tried to disguise the panic in his voice, but Anthony stood close by, listening carefully. When the transfer was complete, Anthony nodded with satisfaction, his expression cold and detached, as though this were nothing more than business. Hours crawled by. Robert considered escaping, but Anthony seemed to anticipate every move. Each time Robert shifted in his seat, Anthony's sharp eyes followed him. The man exuded control, confident in his ability to break down his victim. Robert felt the weight of despair pressing down, the realization that he might never walk away from this place. He thought of Margaret, of his children, of the life he had abandoned for a fantasy that now mocked him. Regret burned in his chest, but regret could not open the door or free him from the grip of a predator who thrived on the desperation of others. As night settled outside, Anthony lit another cigarette and stepped onto the porch for a moment. For Robert, it was the first sliver of opportunity he had been given since entering the house. His heart raced as he glanced at the door, calculating whether he had the courage and the luck to make a run for it before the nightmare consumed him completely. Robert's pulse thundered in his ears as Anthony stepped outside. For the first time since he had arrived, the heavy air inside the house felt breathable. He looked at the door, at the cluttered window, at the narrow hallway that led deeper inside. Every instinct screamed that this was his chance, that if he hesitated now, the opportunity might never return. He dropped his suitcase silently to the floor, his fingers trembling as he reached for the knob. Each second felt stretched. every creak of the old house magnified in his mind. When he twisted the handle, the door gave way with a faint groan, and Robert slipped out into the night, his heart pounding like a drum. He sprinted across the patchy lawn, his shoes crunching against gravel. Behind him, he could hear the faint sound of Anthony's cough as he smoked, oblivious for the moment. Robert's feet carried him to the neighboring house, a modest bungalow with a dim porch light glowing like a beacon of safety. He pounded on the door, desperation etched into every knock. When the startled homeowner opened it, Robert begged for help, his voice quaking with fear. The police were called immediately, and Robert collapsed onto the neighbor's sofa, shaking as he waited for the sound of sirens to pierce the silence. When officers finally arrived, Anthony was still on his porch, the cigarette burning down between his fingers. His expression shifted from calm arrogance to cold fury as he realized the trap had been broken. Police swarmed the property, and Robert watched as Anthony was handcuffed and led away, his face illuminated by flashing red and blue lights. The nightmare, it seemed, had come to an end, but the damage it left behind was irreversible. Investigators spent days combing through Anthony's home. What they uncovered was darker than Robert could have imagined. There were notebooks filled with names, addresses, and personal details of dozens of victims. Hard drives revealed conversations under multiple stolen identities, each one tailored to exploit a different kind of loneliness. Boxes of cell phones, wallets, and even pieces of jewelry hinted that Anthony's schemes stretched back years, leaving behind a trail of shattered lives. Authorities suspected that not everyone had been as lucky as Robert. Some victims had gone silent, their whereabouts unknown, their stories swallowed by Anthony's deception. Robert's name quickly made headlines. Reporters latched onto the scandal of a man who had abandoned his wife of 33 years for an online lover who never existed. Strangers speculated about his choices, dissecting his downfall with cruel fascination. Margaret and the children refused to speak to him, their trust irreparably broken. Though Anthony sat behind bars, awaiting trial for fraud, blackmail, and possible involvement in disappearances, Robert found no relief. His savings were gutted, his marriage destroyed, and his dignity shattered. In the quiet that followed, Robert replayed every moment. The late-night chats, the promises, the fantasies he had built on lies. He realized he had not only been deceived by Anthony, but by himself. He had chased an illusion, blinded by desire for something that was never real. He had walked willingly into danger, ignoring every warning sign until it nearly consumed him. The police could close the case, the courts could deliver justice, but nothing could undo the choices that had led him there. Robert returned to his hometown a changed man, but not in the way he had once hoped. He lived with the weight of humiliation, with the knowledge that his search for love had nearly cost him his life. The story of Angela had ended, but its shadow lingered, a haunting reminder of how easily trust can be twisted, and how quickly a dream can turn into a nightmare.